The Nevada Independent and local PBS have just launched a new joint venture called the Nevada Democracy Project. It's designed to increase civic engagement through a series of town hall-like gatherings. And that's especially relevant now since the next big election cycle is right around the corner. Today on CityCast Las Vegas, we talk with Nevada Independent CEO John Ralston about the challenges of finding thoughtful civic participation in a time of political chaos and increasingly uncivil discourse. It's Wednesday, November 8th. I'm David Figler, and here's what Las Vegas is talking about. John Ralston, welcome back to CityCast Las Vegas. Good to see you, old friend.
Good to be with you, David.
I want to talk about this new project that the Nevada Independent's involved in. So how did the Nevada Democracy Project get started?
So I have been, as you know, I think, somewhat disturbed, especially over the last few years, but even going back further than that, about the lack of civic engagement. You can see it in the number of people who are registered here in Nevada and then the number of people who actually vote in elections. And just by the very nature of the economy, people are just not as engaged as at least I think they should be. And the discourse is just not what it should be either because of the polarization and, with people not eating together if they're of different parties and on Capitol Hill and even in Carson City as well. And so it occurred to me that one of the functions of journalism in this time is to try to get people to talk about what really bothers them, not what I think bothers them, not what you think bothers them, but what the communities, especially ones like underserved communities, think that we are missing, that we are doing wrong. And we had been talking to PBS about some kind of partnership, Vegas PBS, and this seemed like a natural, and they immediately jumped at the idea, and we had our first one on November 1st, and we'll see where it goes from there. Dave, this is a difficult thing to do, and I don't underestimate the size of the mountain that we have to climb, but hopefully I won't feel like Sisyphus after all of this.
Who's it for? Is it for those people who are registered who don't vote? I mean, who do you hope to show up to these Nevada Democracy Project events?
It's not just about who shows up, although that's important. You remember the old Bush 41 message, I care. That's what he said at one town hall. And he, of course, was being a politician. But we want people to believe we care about what they think. And so you send a message. We had, I think, 60 or 70 people show up at the West Las Vegas Library on a Wednesday night right after Halloween. I thought that was pretty good. There were a few elected officials there who had, of course, to say their piece, but there were a lot of community members who really wanted to talk about issues in West Las Vegas and historic systemic racism in this city and state. And I think, we haven't done a good job covering it. I've never done a good job covering it, I don't think, in depth. And we want to send a message that we care about these issues. And I said at the beginning of the event, David, that the most important thing isn't what happens tonight. It's what happens after tonight. And you need to judge us by whether we follow up on these issues that you've brought up or not. And we're going to try. We don't have unlimited bandwidth, as you know, at the Indy, but we're going to try.
Right. And so this is your listening session and PBS joining in on listening. Why did you hold the first listening session in West Las Vegas at that library? Why'd you pick that location, that spot?
So because it is traditionally a heavily Black population, the historic West Side has felt ignored for a long time, generally, not just by the media, but by banks. Redlining came up several times during that first discussion. And Nyoka Foreman, who was our reporter who covers that and who is African-American herself and who has raised a lot of these issues internally at the Indy, thought it would be a good place to start. And she co-hosted with Amber Renee Dixon of Vegas PBS. So we thought it was a good place to start. I don't know where the next one's going to be because, as you mentioned, when you talk about underserved communities, generally they're not. You can't just go to one place and think that's where they all are. They're all over the place, and so it's difficult. And you can't just think of it as like Blacks, Hispanics, Asians. There are others, as you know, very, very well, based on your experience, both in your professional life and in the almost interminable columns that you have occasionally written for the Indy.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned that some elected officials showed up to say their piece. Were they the electeds who served that area? And were there any glaring omissions of electeds who didn't show up who served that area?
They were those who represent that area, or at least it's partly in their districts. Clark County Commissioner William McCurdy was there. Assemblywoman Shonda Summers Armstrong was there, and State Senator Dina Neal was there. One thing I want to do in the future, by the way, David, is limit the amount of time that we give politicians to give speeches at these things, because we really want the people there to think that's not what we're going to expose them to, that this is about them more than the elected officials. But once you put a mic in front of an elected official, they are going to talk for as long as you will let them talk. And Dina Neal can deliver a stem winder as well as her dad did. I told her he would be proud of her looking down.
Storied legislator Joe Neal, who books have been written about. He was such a colorful character and had such an impact. I also wonder, like you said right from the start, we live in a very polarized time. Are you worried that future events might have that sort of accusation and anger exchanges that we see at places like school board meetings? I mean, golly, that's where civil discourse is supposed to happen or engagement is expected, and it does seem to go off the rails, does it not, John Ralston?
It does. And listen, it's a much more frightening world out there for people, for politicians, for journalists than it ever has been. You have to worry about who is going to show up, what their agenda might be. And, whether we should have more security at these events is a question that we need to talk about going forward. I really have to think about that more. We do that for when the Indy puts on our events that we call Indy Talks or our Indy Fest conference. We do have security. And it's just the world that we live in now, David. And so, but on the other hand, I want people, and I said this at the beginning, and we've said it in all the promotions, I think, of this project, this is a place for people to vent, to say that we are doing our job poorly if they think we are doing our job poorly. Why don't you cover this? There were a couple of West Las Vegas legends, I called them. Some people are going to argue with that, who have been there forever. Billy McCurdy, who was William McCurdy's father, and Gene Collins, who was in the assembly a long time ago. Both of them are controversial figures, and both of them stood up and talked about being ignored, having the media twist issues or ignore issues in West Las Vegas. Now, Gene Collins and Billy McCurdy, who I've known forever, they always talk without any fear. But I think that loosened up others in the crowd who I've never heard of, never seen before in my life, to come up and talk about similar kinds of issues. But am I worried about the atmosphere that might develop at some of these? Yeah, sure, I'm worried. But I think we have to make the effort, David. I really do.
Yeah, I want to follow up, John, on the voices that you haven't heard before. I mean, you've got one under your belt. Any already feel good about the future democracy stories that emerge from the first Nevada Democracy Project, from a voice that you were excited to hear from?
I wouldn't say that any of it was feel good, David. There were mostly grievances, but several of the speakers, David, were quite young. And that is heartening to me that there are younger people wanting to get involved, because we've seen more and more young people check out of this entire process of civic engagement and discourse. And I have to tell you, I was pretty impressed with at least a couple of the younger men who stood up and really went through a litany of problems that they've seen growing up in West Las Vegas and then becoming adults in that community.
Yeah, John, and one of our producers was actually in the audience, and she was telling me about a story about one young man who was talking about the effects he's still facing in 2023, going back to this horrible process of redlining where certain parts of our community weren't given the same financial considerations. In fact, just the opposite as parts of the community that white people lived in, and that he can't even afford maintaining his grandmother's house. I mean, events like this, they have a lot of different voices. How does that impact you when you hear stories like that redlining is still a force? I mean, you're listening. What do you do with that information?
Well, we're going to be talking to Nyoka and maybe our partners at Vegas PBS about looking into these kinds of things as much as we can. You know, both the news organizations have limited bandwidths, but I think we've also used it as an excuse to, well, we have to cover the legislature, we have to cover the Senate race, but that can wait. It's the kind of thing, I think, David, and listen, you've lived here your entire life. I've lived here for almost 40 years now, and I've read about Nevada being called the Mississippi of the West and what went on. You know, Sammy Davis Jr. couldn't stay on the Strip. He had to stay in West Las Vegas, these kinds of stories. And we think they're anachronisms, right? This doesn't go on anymore or as much. And then you hear the kind of story that your producer rightly remembered happened there, and you think, you know what? I think one of the main things that people who live in West Las Vegas think is that's what people commonly think who live here now, especially white people. Oh, that was in the past. We're not the Mississippi of the West anymore. That kind of stuff doesn't go on. And of course it does.
Yeah, I mean, that's a common complaint. It's like, why is everyone so concerned with racism? That's something that we solved years ago.
Yeah,
Of course it is. Of course it is. Well, I do imagine that some of these events are hard to navigate as far as just keeping them move forward. But I'm also curious about real-time fact-checking. I mean, this is something that in these public exchanges that we don't see a lot of. I mean, are your moderators, do they have instructions if someone says something that's at least blatantly false or that may be questionable as far as its accuracy, or do you let it fly? How's that work?
Yeah, you know, it's again, in fact, we have a debrief schedule to talk about things we did well and things that we didn't. And I think that's one thing that we really need to improve on in terms of if someone says something, can you back that up? Where's your evidence for that? Treat it like, as you call it, real-time fact-checking. I think you have to be careful how you do that, considering what we're trying to do. We don't want people to say, oh, I went to that Nevada Democracy Project event and they just grilled me. I wouldn't go to that thing. I wouldn't say anything, right? It was like being on
Or if you make it through,
face.
that's like a badge of honor. It's like, I came with the receipts and John Ralston had to shut the F up.
Yeah. How many people
That would draw a lot of people.
Yeah.
That would draw a lot, man.
But the bottom line is that we want this to be a welcoming environment where the point is to listen to people. And even if they say some outlandish things, maybe we should let some of them go. But there is a line that can be crossed where I think the anchors of the event need to be told, listen, you can't just let that go when someone says, you know, David Figler is the greatest Las Vegan. No one is going to believe that, and it needs to be pushed back on.
Does it, though? I have some receipts. Not a lot, and they do look a little forged. So you might have a point there, Ralston. What other issues are you hoping come up in future? I mean, what is the agenda or the schedule or the hopes for what's coming next in this project?
The answer is, to be honest with you, I don't know. But what I hope comes out of this is that people will see that we have a commitment to finding out what communities really care about, as opposed to telling communities that this is what we care about and we're going to write stories about this. I want the word to get out. It's going to take a while, David. I think we're only have the capacity to do these probably quarterly at the beginning. But in between, maybe we'll have time to investigate some of the things we heard at the West Las Vegas Forum before we do the next one. I'm not sure where the next one is going to be, as I said. But I want people I want the word to spread that we are doing this. By the way, I was surprised how many comments that we got from people watching the live stream. It was live streamed both on our website and the Vegas PBS website. And people have either told me in real time that they watched it and they thought X, Y, or Z. But even today, I got a text from someone who decided to watch the live stream. We have to maintain that interest.
Yeah, and I hope you get lots of new voices, maybe even find a columnist who could say what they need to say in fewer than 8,000 words and who doesn't make really bad dad jokes.
Actually, I should tell your audience that while I made that joke about your columns, I wish you would do more columns for us because they are always thought-provoking and they do address issues that nobody else talks about, which is, maybe we should rename this the Nevada Figler Project because that is the kind of thing.
Now you're going too far the other direction. That was an overcorrection, Ralston. Let me ask you this as maybe the last question. I know you got your CEO hat on and your, the most lauded pundit of Nevada hat on. Let's put on citizen John Ralston, and you're invited to the Nevada Democracy Project. What are you going to talk about in the audience? What do you think is like the most pressing thing in Nevada that needs to be discussed that maybe isn't being heard?
I think it's actually an issue that I've talked about a lot as a citizen, as a father, as a stepfather, now with a wonderful, wonderful girl who's 12 years old, who's in school now. There is not a culture in this state that values the things that I think need to be valued for this state to progress, like education. Our elected officials seem to think that going and putting a bunch of money into education, or what they consider a bunch of money at the end of the legislative session, and then sending out mailers later to fellow citizens saying, look what I did, as opposed to getting engaged with the community so the community will value education. So the community will say, we've got to have a better school system. We've got to have better universities. That's what make great cities, David. They really do. And so I just think that we need to create some kind of critical mass behind the whole culture of Nevada. Now, by the way, you're talking to somebody who thought after I got here after a few months in 1984, this place has no soul. I don't want to stay here. I'm going to be here for a max of 2 years. And that was 39 years ago. So, I've tried to do my part. I don't think I've been that successful, but I think you just got to keep talking about it, right?
Yeah, well, we're all a little bit stuck in the muck, but yeah, making the best of it. Hey, John Ralston, good luck saving democracy. The Nevada Democracy Project, definitely something to check out. Thanks for joining us and explaining it all here on CityCast Las Vegas.
Thanks for having me, David.
That's all for today here on CityCast Las Vegas. If you enjoyed the show, hey, go tell a friend so they can get in on that civic engagement train way ahead of next year's election. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. Till then, stay lucky.
You have like the Michael Barbaro of the New York Times' daily voice going now.
Right? I mean, 360 episodes in, we're starting to figure it out.